In all honesty, this is almost like a stop me if you've heard this one joke. We're talking again about neutrality. Now keep in mind, President Washington had issued his neutrality proclamation. President Adams had worked very hard to keep the U.S. neutral. Now we're going to see the exact same thing happen with President Jefferson. Now, you could definitely make the argument that all three of our first presidents realized that we were not yet strong enough to go toe-to-toe with any of the European powers. And as such, for lack of a better term, we needed to keep our mouth shut and our head down. We needed to mind our own business until such time as we were strong enough to really interject ourselves. Okay? So it's 1804. Thomas Jefferson wins re-election by a pretty good margin, 162 electoral votes to 14. And you would think that this would entail a great deal of happiness, that this would be a moment that Jefferson could sit back, relax, and enjoy the fact that he'd won re-election. But unfortunately, that happiness is non-existent. And the reason it doesn't exist is because in 1803, Napoleon, who had been poking the bear, had been trying to goad Britain into fighting, got Britain to renew its war with France. Now keep in mind, back during the French Revolution, there had been fighting between France and Britain. We had stayed neutral. A lot of little sniping had gone on between the two. We had remained neutral. Well, now they're back at war. We've got to figure out, are we going to remain neutral? Can we remain neutral? How long can this fighting continue between Britain and France without dragging us into everything? Now, the biggest problem we have with all of this is the fact that Britain and France are our two biggest trading partners at this time, and a war between the two could easily destroy the American economy if we were not careful. Now, once fighting breaks out between Britain and France, American trade sinks. Remember, trade is really the lifeblood of our nation at this time. We have a great deal of agriculture in the South, but really the big thing that is helping our economy grow is the fact that we have the ability to trade all over the planet. We are sending ships back and forth to Europe on a regular basis, buying, selling, etc. And as a result, that is helping our economy grow. Well, it's going to go downhill because you got to understand, Britain and France could not hurt each other directly. Okay, they could not really get at one another. Okay, Britain had control of the high seas. Okay, the Battle of Trafalgar pretty much confirmed that from that time through World War II, really, that the Royal Navy was going to be the unquestioned master of the high seas. The French Navy would still exist, but it would never have the power that it did before the Battle of Trafalgar. On the other hand, when it came to the continent itself, when it came to the land, France really owned everything. Okay, that was thanks to the Battle of Austerlitz. Okay, they had gone through, they had really a solid position on the continent itself, and there was nothing Britain could really do about that. So you've got Britain with the high seas, France with the land, and because they can't really get at each other, they can't hit one another directly. They're going to have to try and use indirect shots at one another. They're going to have to try and hit one another with a glancing blow. And the worst part possibly about all of this is how it affected the United States. 1806. London issues the Orders in Council, and what this does is it orders that all ports controlled by the French on the continent of Europe are now closed to foreign shipping, and that included American ships. No ship could go to any port controlled by France unless they first stopped at a British port. Now, remember, Britain does have control of the high seas, and so as a result, they're able to really go through and kind of force this on people even though they don't like it. And the problem for Americans is, one, we don't want to have to do what Britain tells us, but we're kind of sunk at that. Two, if we're taking something to France, we stop at a British port, we're going to possibly have our stuff confiscated, or we're going to have to pay some kind of tax of some kind and things like that. And so as a result, this is exceedingly unpopular among the American people. And you can understand that there were those that were willing to do it so that they could keep up, various commercial aspects with France. But then France looks at what Britain had done and they pass their own, edict, for lack of a better term. Napoleon then orders the seizure of any ship, including American, which entered a British port. So Britain says, if you're going to France, you've got to come here first. France says, if you go there first, we're taking your stuff. Both sides are now having a very negative impact on American shipping. And the problem is, what do we do? This is really starting to have an effect on the economy. And anytime an economy goes bad, it's not good for whatever party is in charge of the White House and Congress at the time. So Jefferson is concerned with what is going on. He is very concerned with what can we do? What can he as president, what decision can he make that is going to either fix the situation or at least help to make it a little bit better? Now you might remember we talked about this previously. It was called impressment, the illegal seizure of men, forcing them to serve on various ships. Now, this really applied to American seamen, and it really infuriated the American people. During this time frame, we had about 6,000 Americans were impressed, between 1808 and 1811, mostly in regards to the British Navy. Now, the British Navy argued that they were just seizing deserters from the British Navy and making them go back to serve out whatever they were supposed to be doing. But really, the Americans looked at it and it came across a lot more like just straight up kidnapping. And again, we didn't have a massive fleet. We didn't have anything close to the Royal Navy, and so as a result, we couldn't do a lot about it. We were pretty much just stuck, but it was an annoyance. It was a problem that was going to continue to eat away at the American people. So now you've got the British are messing with American shipping. The French are messing with American shipping. Then in 1807, you actually have something that qualifies as an act of war. 1807, you have a royal frigate, the Leopard, confronts the U.S. frigate, the Chesapeake. Now this is about 10 miles off the coast of Virginia. So we are talking today, we would definitely be inside what's referred to as U.S. territorial waters. The British ship orders the seizure of 4 alleged deserters from the USS Chesapeake. Now, the captain of the Chesapeake refuses to allow the British to do any of that, and so the U.S. ship receives what are called broadsides. Now, you got to think back to the way ships were at this point in time. They have a bunch of cannon, but they're only pointing to the sides of the ship. So the ship turned broadside to the American ship and fired all the cannon from that side, and it did this 3 times. The American ship really was heavily damaged. 3 were killed, 18 were wounded. Now, this is clearly an act of war. When you have a military vessel of one nation firing on the military vessel of another nation, by definition, that is an act of war. Now, Britain was completely in the wrong on this one. But Jefferson wanted to cling to peace. He did not want us to go to war, even in the face of something like this. And so his desire to remain neutral was going to have a very negative effect. A lot of people saw this as a great insult to the American nation, and they wanted, war with Britain at this point in time. Jefferson, however, as I said earlier, did have an understanding that really we weren't going to be able to do much at this point, except probably, get beaten. And so as a result, he tried to hold off. He still clung to peace even in the face of, extreme pressure and clear acts of war.